Hey everyone, now it's time to talk about the bar-bar-barian, aka Great Weapon Fighter, aka Barbie. I'm sorry, I'll never call it that again. Just a small disclaimer, this information is accurate as of March 3rd. It is very possible, and in fact, nearly 100% likely, that a lot of this stuff is going to be changed at least slightly before it goes live. I know the devs have acknowledged that Barbarian is not in the greatest state right now, and they will probably do some relatively drastic, I don't want to say drastic, but more significant changes as time goes on. Also, please keep in mind that this is not a guide, this is just a brief overview, maybe not so brief by the time you actually get through it all, but it's an overview of everything that is in the Barbarian's kit at the moment, so that you have a general idea of how the class is going to function even if you can't access the preview server. Barbarians can now queue as either a tank or DPS. Yep, they've got a whole entire paragon dedicated to tanking, a new blocking and shielding mechanic for them, and a whole lot of threat-related powers. There's always been the Sentinel path for Barbarian, but no one really ever used it, ever. It was pretty bad. So the two paragon paths are Sentinel, as you can see, is the tank, and Blademaster is the DPS paragon. The majority of people are probably going to take Blademaster because that's what they've been most accustomed to while playing Barbarian. That being said, we're going to start with Sentinel. However, we are first going to take a look at the two mechanics. You have your tab, which is your unstoppable or battle rage as it's called in the other paragon, but they do different things for each paragon. So in Sentinel, you're able to activate unstoppable whenever it reaches 50%. Which is the same as live. However, in the Sentinel Paragon, activating Unstoppable increases the speed of your at-will attacks, it automatically blocks all attacks as long as you have stamina, and having this active lowers stamina regeneration, and it also gives you control immunity whenever it's active. The other mechanic doesn't have a tooltip, it just says combo on it, but this is the block mechanic that Barbarians have. It's on the shift, so that means you lose your sprint as Sentinel. But you walk around and look all cool. Like, this works a lot better with a bigger blade. If you have a tiny blade, this doesn't look as cool. Yeah, this is the way you block. I was wondering how this was going to work because fighters and paladins have an actual physical shield, whereas barbarians do not. So I was curious about how this was going to work, but this is what it looks like. Since I didn't mention how shielding and blocking actually works, like I did in my paladin video, I will explain it here. So basically, on the right side, you have your guard meter, which runs off of your stamina. So whenever you want to block an attack, you just hold shift and it will use up your stamina, it will use up your guard until you run out. And at that point, the damage will go directly to your hit points instead of your shield. And your shield has the same number of hit points as you. So for example, right now, if I held shift, I would have 184k shield. It's basically like another layer of hit points that's invisible. And this is directional based blocking, so if you get hit from behind here, you are going to take damage, whereas if you're hit from the front, your shield will take the damage first. Now that we're done with that, we're just going to jump straight into at-wills, and just like I've said in every class video so far, every class has its powers split into two parts. The first half of them are universal powers that both paragons can access, and the second half are paragon-specific powers that only the paragon you have chosen can use. Except for dailies, which is 3 and 2. Now, let's just start with at-wills. We've got Sure Strike, Reaping Strike, Threatening Rush, and Wicked Strike. So Sure Strike is the same as before, looks the same, functions the same, and Reaping Strike gives the added effect of getting additional determination whenever you take damage, and it also reduces your movement speed. Threatening Rush has 3 charges, and you lunge at the enemy, and it gives you increased threat versus them. So that's the first of the many ways that you can gain threat as a Sentinel. For demonstration purposes, that's Threatening Rush. You basically rush at them and punch them in the face. It's the same animation that the fighter had for their Threatening Rush, but there's no shield on Barbarians, so it literally just looks like you're going, hi-ya, punching them in the face. Now, Reaping Strike is this the one that you have to channel, and then it does damage to everything nearby. And of course, Sure Strike, just to end with something familiar, is the exact same. One thing I don't like about the new determination gauge is that it doesn't tell you when you can activate Unstoppable. Like, obviously we know that it's over 50%, and we can visually determine around when 50% is, but there's no visual indicator whenever you pass 50%. And that is something that I wish they could add. Like, maybe the outside of this bar will glow or something. It has this little thing when it's full. Okay, so for encounters, we're just gonna go in order, because that's what we've been doing for every video, and that's just what makes sense. So first up, we have Not So Fast, which deals physical damage and adds a slow effect for 6 seconds. And that's what it looks like. Pretty much the same as the one on live. Has a really low magnitude. There's really no reason at all to use this power because the magnitude is so low and you can get more benefit from using other things. Restoring Strike deals a moderate magnitude damage and restores your own hit points for a 200 magnitude heal. Now this one is kind of nice, although I wish the magnitude for healing would be a little bit larger, like 250 or 300. Now, next up, we have Mighty Leap, and that is pretty much the same as live, but there's really no reason to use this either because the magnitude is so low. The only reason to use this is if you're trying to parkour and get outside of maps and stuff, which is a fun usage of this for sure, but it sucks having a power that's otherwise basically useless. Next up, we have Indomitable Battle Strike, the power that barbarians were basically known for prior to this. It increases your determination gauge by 10 and has a 700 magnitude. So it is a pretty large magnitude in comparison to the other powers that we have, but it still feels pretty lackluster compared to how it used to be. Yeah. If that had crit, it would have been a little bit more, but you get the point. The highest I've been able to hit as a crit just standing here in this area is like 90-some K, and that's with my companion debuffing the dummy. Next up, we have Punishing Charge. This has 4 charges, and you dash forward and dealing damage to enemies in front of you. Once again, this is another power that's basically useless at the moment, because the magnitude is so low, and there's just really no reason to use it, if we're being honest. Okay. There is one reason to use it, and that's for mobility, because as a Sentinel, you can't sprint. So that is the one reason that I would say it's okay to have either this or Mighty Leap slotted, but of course you'd get more benefit from other things. Next up on our list is Frontline Surge. Deal physical damage to enemies and knock them back. And again, extremely small magnitude, and none of these have any threat generation mechanic. So that is the only thing that would make them worth slotting because of their low damage would be threat generation, and these ones so far do not have that. But just for demonstration purposes, we're going to demonstrate. I mean, it looks pretty cool, but that's about it. Next up, we have Daring Shout. Threaten enemies in a cone before you, placing yourself at the top of their threat list, and this also restores stamina. So, here's one that's actually worth using as Sentinel, and because it generates threat and restores stamina. However, it still has the same look and feel prior to Mod 16. Now we have Takedown. Knocks them down, increases your threat versus them, and has a moderate magnitude damage. So this is what it looks like. Hi-ya! That's exactly what I imagine that my character is thinking and saying whenever they execute that power. Hi-ya! And now we have Come and Get It. This draws in nearby enemies, decreases the damage you take by 10%, and lasts for 8 seconds. It's kind of like a little whirlwind effect, but obviously you can't tell because these are healing dummies. They're target dummies, not healing dummies. And the last encounter on this list is Ignore Weakness. This causes you to recover 10% of the damage you have taken in the last 10 seconds and increases your deflection rate by 5% for 5 seconds. This one is actually really interesting to me. I do think it definitely has a place slotted as a Sentinel right now, and I'm definitely going to be testing that one out. Ignore Weakness looks like this. And looks pretty cool if you ask me, but it would have healed if I had taken damage, so. All 5 of the dailies in the Sentinel Paragon path are ones that you will recognize from live. The new daily is in the Blademaster Paragon. But just for the sake of going over things, we have Spinning Strike here that grants you control immunity and increases your movement speed by 100% with a magnitude of 800. Savage Advance, lunge at the enemy with a magnitude of 800 and knock back any nearby enemies. This is one that I really liked to use on live just because it was fun, and I'm glad that it's still here because it was fun. It was especially fun to use in PvP. Now, Avalanche of Steel. Leap into the air, and then you're immune to damage for 5 seconds before returning and damaging all nearby enemies. And it has a magnitude of 1000 and knocks down enemies. Now, Indomitable Strength. Pummel your target with 2 attacks, knocking them away, and this has a magnitude of 2800. And then the target's attack damage is reduced by 10% and lasts for 5 seconds. Now this actually seems pretty strong, so we're going to see what this looks like. But the last daily is Slam, and we all know what that is like, and the enemies are slowed while they're in the area. So that is what casting it looks like if you weren't familiar, and it looks pretty cool. Now on to class features. The 4 universal class features are Bravery, Steadfast Determination, Weapon Master, and Trample the Fallen, all the ones that you should be familiar with by name. Now, Bravery increases your deflection by 2000 and movement speed by 10%. So if you want to run fast, you choose that one. Especially as a Sentinel when you can't sprint. But that doesn't mean equip that one, I'm just saying if you want to run fast, that's what you use. I probably wouldn't pick that one. Steadfast Determination causes you to steadily gain determination while in combat. That's pretty much the same as it is now. Weapon Master, you refine your mastery of great weapons, increasing your critical strike by 500 on every successive hit. Stacks up to 3 times. About the same as what it is on live. Trample the Fallen, when a foe is affected by control powers, deal 5% more damage to it. That is also pretty much the same as live. Now next up we have Enduring Warrior, Warrior's Courage, Steel Defense, and Ferocious Reaction. So Enduring Warrior causes you to gain 10% increased incoming healing, and when you kill an enemy, you heal yourself for 1% of your maximum hit points. Warrior's Courage gives you 2500 defense and 2500 deflection when you're below 50% hit points. Steel Defense, after activating a daily power, become immune to damage for 2 seconds. This is one that I really liked to use in PvP. That's definitely a good one, but keep in mind that action point gain is a lot slower than it is pre-Mod 16, so you won't be casting dailies as often. And lastly, Ferocious Reaction. When your hit points drop below 15%, you regain 25% of your hit points. The foe that hit you takes that much damage, and this effect can only occur once every 3 minutes. Now that right there is the reason why I would never choose this, because you have a 3-minute cooldown between procs for this, and that is quite a long time in the Neverwinter world. And now, let's talk about feats. There's no more feat trees in Mod 16. You get to choose 5 feats, 1 from each pair listed here, and the first pair is either Enraging Durability or Bloodthirsty. So Enraging Durability makes Unstoppable grant an additional 2500 defense and an additional 5% temporary hit points. That one seems pretty decent to me. The other option is Bloodthirsty. While it's active, you heal for 10% of the damage that you deal. That one also seems pretty decent to me. Keep in mind that we are playing a tank here. This is Sentinel, a tank paragon. The next pair we have Countless Scars or an Even Fight. So Countless Scars, each time you're struck, you gain 250 defense for 5 seconds, and it can stack up to 10 times. So that's a total of 2500 defense possible there. And then this other one, you gain 1000 defense for each enemy within 30 feet of you, up to 5000. So that one's 5000 possible defense. So you either have an option of up to 5000 defense depending on enemies, or 2500 defense depending on how often you're hit. So both of those, it's pretty situational which one you'd want to go for, honestly. It's a shame that we can't actually change these at will, because that would be cool. That would get rid of the point of retraining tokens, so never mind. Next up, we have Act of Desperation, or Spur of the Moment. So, Act of Desperation, when your health drops below 15%, your encounter powers have their cooldowns refreshed, and your maximum health is increased by 15% for 5 seconds. This effect can only trigger once every 90 seconds. So that right there is why I would never pick it, 90-second cooldown. Then again, it's also not that great. The only good thing about it is it completely refreshes all of your cooldowns. But if you drop below 15% health, at that point you're really just blocking and trying to run towards your healer and trying not to die. Other one, Spur of the Moment, I actually really like this one. When you're in combat, you periodically have the change of having, I found a typo! A random encounter power has its cooldown instantly reset. You gain 2500 deflection for 3 seconds, or you gain 10% of your action points. So basically, every 20 seconds or so, I'd figure, is you get one of these 3 things, and pretty nice. especially the action point gain part, because as a Sentinel, you're not really gaining action points very quickly. Now we have critical defense or observant fighter. So critical defense, whenever you critical strike, I found another typo! You gain 1% of your maximum hit points as temporary hit points, and this stacks up to 10 times. So keep in mind that critical strike is capped at 50%. However, it does not say how long these stacks last, so it's hard to say if that would be worth it at all. But compared to the other one, whenever you fail to deflect an attack, your deflect is increased by 2500, and it stacks up to 20 times, and all the stacks are lost upon a successful deflection. This one just seems much better than the other one. It's increasing your defenses pretty much constantly. There's no cooldown on it, and you can get up to whatever 2500 times 20 is. That's a lot of deflection. Probably will never reach 20 stacks because at that point you'll have deflected something and lost stacks, but moving on. Debilitating blows or heavy restoration. So debilitating blows, not so fast frontline surge and takedown now reduce the damage an enemy deals to you by 20% for 5 seconds and does not stack. Those are 3 powers that I probably would never ever use, so I'd probably never ever pick this one. Heavy restoration, ignore weakness, now always restores at least 10% of your maximum life, and restoring strike now grants a heal over time for 6 seconds that heals you for 1% of your maximum life each second. This one I really like. This makes restoring strike very useful, and also slotting ignore weakness, and then a third encounter power that will increase your threat, like daring shout, and then using threatening rush to also maintain threat. That's how I would do it. So that's pretty much it for the feats, but first we're going to take a quick look at ability scores. Ability scores are the same for all classes, and there are no primary or secondary ability scores. You have an initial stat roll, and then you're just able to pick which ability scores would be good for your class. So obviously I want Constitution because since I'm a tank and my stamina, my shield is based on my hit points, I'm going to want as much hit points as possible. And if you caught a glimpse of my hit points there, they're really low for a tank build, and I need to work on that. I don't have an Energon on the preview server. That would be 32,000 hit points plus some radiance in my defenses that I don't have, and you get the point. But you want to stack hit points if you're playing a tank. And then strength increases your stamina regeneration and physical damage boost, which does not display properly at the moment. But stamina regeneration is also very important for a tank because that is your shield. Now onto the paragon that most people care about, the Blademaster, the DPS paragon. I'm going to skip all of the universal powers and only talk about the powers specific to Blademaster because I already discussed them once and I don't want to repeat myself. So the 2 at-wills that you have are Blademaster Strike and Brash Strike. So Blademaster Strike is the renamed version of Weaponmaster Strike. It does the same thing. However, one thing that I noticed and already reported is that if you hold down Blademaster Strike, you will spasm out after every couple hits. The other one, Brash Strike, crush your enemies with a combo of heavy-hitting swings, each more powerful than the last. Brash Strike actually looks pretty cool. Really aggressive. As for encounters, we have Hidden Daggers, Roar, Flourish, Battle Fury, and Grand Fissure. So Hidden Daggers is pretty similar to Live. It has 3 charges and deals projectile damage with a pretty low magnitude. That is one thing that I don't like, is how low the magnitude is, because with Hidden Daggers before, you used to be able to do pretty decent damage to groups of mobs. But it also increases your melee damage, which is physical damage by the way, against affected targets by 10%, and it lasts for 5 seconds. So that is something that I would keep slotted for the 10% damage bonus. Roar has a really low magnitude, and builds determination for everything that you hit with it, and it roots them. Something that I would never use. I never used this on Live, probably never going to use it here. But for all intents and purposes, we're going to demonstrate it. Sounds like a lion. Okay, moving on. Next up, we have Flourish. That is a pretty decent magnitude hit there, and you stab them and stun them for 3 seconds. And this is what it looks like. Same way it looked on Live. Now we have Battle Fury. This is one that I also keep slotted because it increases your damage dealt by 10% for 10 seconds, and nearby allies' damage dealt is increased by 5%. The effects are reduced by 20% every 2 seconds though. So that means that you're losing 2% damage every 2 seconds until it runs out. So basically you want to use this right before your strongest attack to make sure you get the maximum damage bonus. And lastly, we have Grand Fissure. This is a pretty low magnitude attack that is pretty much the same as live, and it slows enemies for 5 seconds. Now, the two dailies that we have here are Crescendo and Adamantine Strike. Crescendo is the same as live, has a really large magnitude, stuns for 2 seconds, and knocks down for 1 second. And while you're attacking, you're immune to control effects. And we have Adamantine Strike. Deal physical damage to enemies in a cone in front of you and increase the target's damage taken by 5% for 10 seconds. It has a lower magnitude, but it does have a debuff on it, so that is something that will be helpful. So this is what Adamantine Strike looks like. Looks pretty awesome if you ask me. And seems like it might be useful in AoE environments, perhaps. Because that wasn't a crit. And I did one earlier that was a crit, and it hit for like 154k. As far as Blademaster Mechanics go, the shift is the sprint that you are used to. And tab is called Battle Rage in this Paragon. Activating Battle Rage increases the speed of your at-will attacks, gives you control immunity, increases your damage dealt by 10%, and decreases damage taken by 10%. Now on to class features. The 4 Paragons specific for Blademaster are Steel Blitz, Destroyer, Wrathful Determination, and Steel Resolve. So Steel Blitz, every time you damage an enemy with one of your powers, you have a 10% chance to instantly strike again, dealing 50% of your weapon damage. Destroyer, your huge swipes strike deep, increasing your damage by 3% every time you hit more than 3 enemies with a single attack, and this stacks up to 3 times. This one seems okay if you're fighting like trash mobs, but it's definitely not useful in bosses. I am curious though if Lightning Enchantment would count as hitting more than one target with a single attack or not. I don't remember if it did on live, but that is something I probably won't test. And I also saw somebody say in the Enclave that it was broken, so I don't know. We'll see. Wrathful Determination, you gain up to 2.5% melee or physical damage as your determination fills up, and this bonus is doubled when your determination is full. So, pretty much the same as live in terms of mechanics there. Now we have Steel Resolve. Your skills with weaponry increase, allowing you to mitigate the duration of controlling effects by 10%. Probably not something that I would use. On to Feats. We've got Against All Odds or Mighty Blade. So against all odds, your encounter powers have their cooldowns reduced by 10% for each target they hit after the first. Now this is something that would be cool if we had more AoE powers, but the AoE powers that we have are on longer cooldowns, and there's very few of them. A lot of them are single target, so I don't find this one to be as useful. And now we have Mighty Blade. Your damage is increased by 10% when striking multiple enemies. I just decided to go with that one because if multiple enemies is defined as more than one, so even if there's 2 enemies and I just managed to clip them with hidden daggers or something, I'll still get the 10% bonus damage. Weaving Strikes or Rampage. So Weaving Strikes, the final combo of Sure Strike and Brash Strike, as well as a fully charged Reaping Strike, grant you 1 stack of Precision. Precision increases your next encounter's damage dealt by 10%. And the other one, Rampage. Your encounter powers grant a stack of Fury. Upon reaching 5 stacks, you enter a Rampage for 10 seconds, increasing at-will damage dealt by 20%. I chose this one because, in Mod 16 especially, you're going to be using a lot more at-wills than before while you wait for your cooldowns. Barbarians were known for using a lot of at-wills pre-Mod 16 as well, and that is still the case. Now you have Steel Reaper or Unending Fury. Steel Reaper makes you deal up to 10% more damage based on how low your target's life is. Your determination generation from attacks is increased by 10%. That determination generation, that's really weird to say, determination generation. Sounds like it could be in a song or something. But that's really good because you want to constantly be using your Battle Rage just because it gives you bonus damage and bonus damage resistance, and it's just a good thing to be using. Then you have Unending Fury. Your damage is increased by 2% for each power you use while unstoppable. This effect lingers for 3 seconds after unstoppable ends, and it has a maximum of 8 stacks. So it's a possible 16% damage bonus while you're unstoppable, but you really have to time all of your attacks properly and stack them all up at once and hope that it lasts long enough and that you're able to get the bonus damage in. And that just doesn't really appeal to me. Next you have Overpenetration and Flanking Expertise. So Overpenetration increases your armor penetration by 2500. If your attacks would fully pierce your target's armor, this is converted into 5% bonus damage for your at-wills, encounters, and dailies. Now, I really like this one. Partly because I already have 30,000 armor penetration, and that's should be more than enough for what I'm trying to do, but it just feels really good. It's a flat stat bonus that will really help you, and if it's too much stats, you get damage bonus instead, and I really like that. It's not just like flat stat bonus, and then if you're over it, it's just like, oh well. It actually has a use regardless if you have enough armor penetration or not. Now the other one, flanking expertise, your critical strike is increased by 2500 while you have combat advantage against your target. Now this one could also be useful, but especially before you get your crit up to where you're going to need it. So I do see the appeal of both options in this pair. And lastly, we have Relentless and Offensive Recovery. So Relentless makes Battle Fury's duration increase by 25%, and Roar now generates Determination as if it hit 2 additional targets. Basically makes Roar more effective, and Battle Fury more effective. Offensive Recovery, your at-will powers have a 9% chance to restore the cooldown of an encounter power. This one is really, really good. You're using at-wills all the time, so there's a pretty good chance that you're going to have your cooldowns restored, and that is huge because of how few sources of recharge speed there are. So that is probably my favorite feat in all of Barbarian. One thing that I forgot to mention while we were talking about tanking is the threat meter. That's this little thing up here that I am hoping that they detach from this area or make larger, preferably both, so that I can move it wherever I want. What this does is it tells you if you are your target's highest priority or not. As you can see, I'm looking at this target dummy, and I am my target's current highest priority, so it would be attacking me if it were an actual enemy. And maintaining threat is something that's very important for tanks in Mod 16, because that is pretty much a tank's job, to hold threat, keep the enemies off the rest of your team while they attack and heal. And you'll be able to see, if you're in a party, you'll be able to see your party's threat meters listed here as well, and you'll be able to see if you're about to lose threat to somebody so that you can get it back. And this will be green, yellow, or red, depending on how much threat you have versus an enemy. You can see this in my video of me attempting to tank ETOS for the first time. The video itself didn't really go very well, but it's a good demonstration of stuff. And just a note, healers generate a ton of threat. That's one thing that I learned. They generate a ton of threat, so that kind of sucks, but it makes sense because it's supposed to be like that. Well, guys, that's pretty much it for the Barbarian. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you found this video a little bit educational, a little bit helpful to help you get to know Mod 16 a little bit better. Please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more Mod 16 related videos. I have a video coming out for every class and pretty much every aspect of Mod 16, except for PvP, but that can be arranged if I get people to test it with me. That being said, thanks again for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I will see you later. Bye!